So, in many ways, the Karate Kid franchise is almost like a poster child for Hollywood's, reputation for recycled storytelling. The original 1984 film was a huge hit when it was released, and therefore was inevitably followed by two direct sequels, a standalone spin-off, and a 2010 remake starring Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith. And there's even been the successful Cobra Kai streaming series just tossed into the mix for good measure. But now the latest entry in the sprawling franchise, Karate Kid Legends, is a reboot that attempts to unite the original film with the 2010 remake while also capitalizing on the success of the streaming series. Does it pull it off, or is it merely a soulless Hollywood effort to milk another nostalgic story dry? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So let me just start off by saying that I watched the original Karate Kid, several times growing up, and I saw the 2010 remake when it came out, but I'm not necessarily a die-hard fan or anything of this franchise, and I haven't gotten on board the Cobra Kai bandwagon just yet, but I am a fan of these sort of Hollywood underdog stories, and I actually thought that the trailers for this movie looked pretty good. I think maybe that is a good summary for the film itself. Not great, not terrible, just pretty good. Because Karate Kid Legends takes a mishmash of familiar characters and story tropes, really from across the entire series, tosses them all into a blender for what I think to be an entertaining, but largely overstuffed and disjointed reboot that fails to commit to any of its interesting ideas long enough to make a lasting impression. And if you have watched a Karate Kid movie in any of its earlier incarnations, then you will likely be able to anticipate all of the punches that this film tries to throw, with one very notable exception that I'll get into in just a moment, because there aren't many surprises to be found, but I do think that the familiar narrative path is still fun to travel down at times. And Ben Wang is an actor who at least first caught my attention as being the standout of the 2023 Angel Studios film Sight, and I think he is well cast here as our new Karate Kid. I think he has enough charm to carry the film, while also bringing something fresh as just being the first actor in the role that is of Asian heritage. I think he is endearing in the dramatic scenes, but also proves himself capable of handling the action sequences, which are all exciting, even if I think they're a little bit too few and far between. But like I said, there is one surprising curveball in this story, and that is that unlike the prior films, our new Karate Kid is not a novice at martial arts, because when the film opens up, he is already a skilled, kung fu student under the tutelage of Mr. Han, who is the character played by Jackie Chan. In fact, during this film's first action scene, we see him totally lay the smackdown on just a bunch of adult goons. And to me, the film's most inspired creative decision is to subvert audience expectations, for the series, and invert the traditional character roles, because during the first half of this film, the Karate Kid is not, in fact, the student. He's actually the sensei, tasked with training a down on his luck former boxer turned pizza shop owner, played by actor Joshua Jackson, to step back into the ring. And I think the role reversal is unexpected, but not unwelcome, and at least to me, hinted that this series may have a few new tricks up its sleeve after all. But alas, this movie is called Karate Kid and not Boxer Adult, so the film doesn't stay committed to that decision for long. And by the midway point of this film, it does revert back to the standard series template of a kid trained by a quirky sensei to fight a bully who happens to be the ex-boyfriend of his love interest. And to me, this is where this film begins to get derailed, because I think the biggest issue with Karate Kid Legends is not that it's a bad film, but just that it's multiple decent films all stuffed into one, because various interesting story elements weave in and out without ever being given enough breathing room to find their footing. Because the intriguing role reversal idea is abandoned without what I think to be a satisfying conclusion. And then by the time the familiar storyline does kick into action, at the midway point of the runtime, it just feels too rushed to build momentum. And those two dueling storylines almost compete more than they complement each other, as it is, at least I found it to be, a bit awkward and unconvincing to try and reframe the Karate Kid partway through as being vulnerable and in need of serious training, after he has already like emphatically demonstrated his butt-kicking abilities to the audience and like shown him in the role as the teacher. And when the film like does begin to settle into like the second half storyline, it attempts to shake things up once again by bringing back the original Karate Kid, Ralph Macchio, and like the dynamic between him and Jackie Chan as like two instructors teaching different branches of martial arts with kung fu and karate is a really fun idea. Like, I think the dynamic between them is probably the highlight of the film. But I just think it comes far too late and like is left far too undeveloped, because Macchio's return will be nostalgic for fans of the original, but he doesn't actually like have very much screen time, and it was just never clear to me like what he actually offered that was different than like what Jackie Chan was already doing. And it is amusing to like see the, competitive banter of the two masters, but ultimately I think it's just another interesting seed of an idea that is just not given enough necessary room to grow, feeling more like just an excuse to play on nostalgia and like bring back a legacy character rather than something that like made sense for the story itself. As far as kind of to consider things going on the surface of this, really not a whole lot, although this is a PG-13 film, because for language, I counted 6 to 10 kind of like minor profanities, mostly starting with the letters S and A, as well as like several other, crude words. Really nothing like overbearing, but probably more than I would have liked for like my own 10-year-old sons. For violence, as you might expect, there are, plenty of scenes of like martial arts violence, although nothing, graphic or, it's all relatively bloodless. You do see one character who is like murdered with a knife, but the actual stab is not shown on screen. And again, there's no blood. Sexuality, nothing that I notice here as far as that. The only other kind of content thing, just to be aware of as Christians, is that there are like various instances like depicting kind of like Chinese religious customs or spirituality. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, it's probably expected for a film like this. There is no shortage of like motivational teachings and quotes. In fact, like, to me, like, half the dialogue in this film seem to be some sort of like sage nuggets of wisdom, because you get some great quotes like, you practice violence, you get violence. But I think kind of the overarching and maybe like unifying theme is about perseverance. I think kind of like in the most immediate way, the theme applies to the karate elements, because Li Fong, who is the Karate Kid, is sort of told multiple times that like when you get knocked down, you get back up. But I think the theme like has deeper, like more personal significance as well. I think like by featuring a Karate Kid who like begins the film with like the martial arts abilities that like the previous heroes ended the film with, does shift like the character arc in several significant ways. And like for Fong, like kind of the primary lesson is not just perseverance to like overcome like the physical challenges as much as it is like the emotional ones, because his like older brother was murdered shortly before like the start of the film, and Fong feels guilty and like responsible for freezing in the moment and like not saving him. And really all throughout the film, like both he and his mother just struggle to move on from that life-altering moment. And in some of what I think to be this film's like best written dialogue, Fong and the pizza parlor owner talk about being able to like pinpoint the moment that their lives changed forever. With the former, it is like the birth of his daughter. Well, for Fong, it is the loss of his brother. Kind of having like one positive experience and then one negative. And yet the film suggests that like while the past cannot be undone or like relived, those past events don't forever define us, and like we can persevere and like move into the future. And that wisdom in the film obviously applies like in a general sense just to the process of like overcoming grief and loss, but I think it also has spiritual relevance for Christians, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the Apostle Paul kind of famously used like discipline and perseverance in the context of like sports and competition as a metaphor for the Christian life. And at one point in the film, Jackie Chan's character says to Fong, "In life, we only have one question. Is it worth fighting for or not?" I think as the Apostle Paul reminds us in the Bible, the gospel is a prize worth fighting for. And so like when life knocks us down, we get back up, persevere, and continue striving towards the goal. So in the end, I think Karate Kid Legends is a perfectly watchable and often entertaining film, even as it does leave like, its full potential unreached. I think fans of the franchise will appreciate the various like callbacks and like returning characters, and even audiences just looking for simple Hollywood underdog story may find enough here to scratch that itch. But to me, I think a lack of commitment to like a singular vision prevents this film from like fashioning any of its overabundance of ideas into anything more than just another average like Hollywood retread. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you really enjoyed this film, if you're a fan of the original, or maybe you feel like this series is running out of steam, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done it too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.